He slid the check across the kitchen table with 2 fingers, the way you push a napkin toward a stranger. $5,000. Town. The memo line said, in his neat accountant handwriting, for everything. 9 years I had fed my mother, bathed my mother, slept on a cot outside my mother's door. And according to that check, 9 years came to $5,000 and a pen he had already opened and laid out for me. Here is what my brother didn't know, because I didn't know it yet either. For 6 of those years, our mother's money had been paying a caregiver $2,400 a month. Every month. On the first, the caregiver, named on that paperwork, was me. I never saw $1 of it. Today, I read family money records for a living. I find the dollars that relatives hide from each other, and I find them for a courtroom. 4 years after, I walked out of that kitchen with a duffel bag and a green grocery ledger. A probate magistrate read my brother's name into the record and ordered him to give back everything he took. In a courtroom I petitioned for. On a morning I had circled on my calendar like a birthday. My name is Ruth Ann Kessler. I am 41 years old, and I live in Dayton, Ohio. If you have ever been the one who stayed, the sibling who gave up the job, the apartment, the years, while somebody else handled the money side, then this story is going to feel like I read your mail. Before I take you back to the beginning, do one thing for me. If your family ever treated your work like it was free because you loved them, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments whether you'd have cashed that check. Because by the end of this video, you are going to know exactly what that green ledger turned out to be worth. And I promise you, it was not $5,000. This is how I got there. 9 years before that morning in the kitchen, my mother had a stroke on a Tuesday in October. She was 61. She was carrying a laundry basket up the stairs of the house on Corwin Avenue, the house she and my father had paid off before he died, and her left leg simply stopped answering her. She sat down on the 4th step and waited 40 minutes for someone to find her, because she didn't want to bother anybody. That was my mother. In one sentence, she would rather sit on a stair for 40 minutes than be a burden. I was 28. I had a 1-bedroom apartment across town, a job doing scheduling and billing at a dental office, and a car with 4 more payments on it. My older brother, Daniel, was 34. He was a financial advisor at a firm downtown. Glass building, gray suits. The kind of office where the coffee machine costs more than my car did. My sister was in the middle, living 2 hours away in Columbus with a toddler. So when the hospital said Mom would need help with stairs, help with bathing, help with everything, on her left side, the family had a meeting in the hospital cafeteria, and the meeting lasted 11 minutes. Daniel laid it out like a quarterly report. My sister had a baby. He had a career and clients. I had, and I am quoting him, the most flexible situation. He said it kindly. That is the thing I need you to understand about my brother. All the way through this story, he never once raised his voice at me. He never called me a name. He said everything in the calm, patient tone of a man explaining a mortgage to a young couple. He said, "Ruthie, you are the one Mom trusts. I'll handle the money side. You just focus on Mom." And then he said the sentence he would repeat for 9 years. The sentence I want you to remember, because I am going to hand it back to him at the end of this story. He folded his hands and said, "Someone has to be the practical one." I gave up my apartment. 6 weeks later, I gave the dental office my notice. I moved back into my childhood bedroom with 2 duffel bags, and Daniel met me at the front door and gave me a brass key on a loop of string, like I was being issued equipment, my own key to my own childhood home, handed over like a favor. I remember standing on the porch holding it and feeling grateful. I want you to sit with that for a second. He handed me the key to the house I grew up in, so I could work in it for free, and I said, "Thank you." The ledger came a month After that, I bought groceries with Mom's debit card for the first time. Milk, bread, her blood pressure prescription. $41 and change. And that night, Daniel called. Not angry. Concerned. He'd seen the charge come through, and he thought, for everyone's protection, we should have a system, so nobody can ever question anything. He said, you know how families get about money. The next Sunday, he brought me a ledger. Green cover, hard corners, the old-fashioned kind with the ruled columns. From the office supply store on Brown Street, he said, every dollar in, every dollar out. Date, amount, what it was for. Keep the receipts. And I did. For 9 years, I wrote down every gallon of milk, every copay, every pack of adult diapers, every furnace filter. In blue ink, in that green book, so that no one could ever question anything. Hold on to that green ledger. It is the single most important object in this story, and even I didn't know what it actually was until a woman I hadn't met yet told me. Years later, in a strip mall office, with a broken window blind. We'll get there. 8 months after the stroke, Daniel came over on a Saturday with papers. There was a lawyer involved. A man from his office building, tall, smelled like cigarettes and peppermint. And a woman Daniel introduced as a notary. A notary is just the person whose official stamp is supposed to prove that you really sat in a room and really signed your own name. That stamp is the whole job. Remember the stamp. How it matters later, more than almost anything else in this story. The papers did 2 things, and Daniel explained both at the kitchen table, while Mom drank her tea with her good hand. First, a power of attorney, a document that lets one person sign, as if they were another person. Mom's stroke had left her speech slow and her signature shaky, so it made sense, he said, for someone to be able to handle her bank, her bills, her taxes. That someone would be him. Second, a trust. He described a trust to Mom like this, and honestly it is a decent description. A legal box you put the family's money in. The savings, the pension, eventually the house. With one person holding the only key. That person is called the trustee. That person would also be him. Ruthie does the hands-on, he said, smiling at me across the table. And I'll be the key holder. Someone has to be the practical one. Mom signed with her shaky right hand. The notary pressed her stamp. Down twice. Daniel took every page with him when he left, and I never saw them again. Not the copies. Not the account statements. Not one bank balance. Not for 8 years. When I asked, once or twice a year, how Mom's money was holding up, he'd say the same thing. Warm as a heating vent. It is all handled. You just focus on Mom. And I did focus on Mom. Let me compress 9 years for you, because you don't need the diary. You need the weight of it. Physical therapy on Mondays and Thursdays. 8 in the morning. For 6 years. Me driving. Me in the waiting room. Her left hand curling in on itself. A little more each winter. Me learning to cut her food, then to button her sweaters, then to wash her hair in the kitchen sink, because she couldn't manage the shower rail anymore. My car died in year 2, and I didn't replace it. We shared hers. My phone got older. My friends got quieter, then got married, then stopped calling. Not out of cruelty, just because I could never come. If you've ever been a family caregiver, you already know the strangest part, and I'll say it for everyone who hasn't. It is not the work that gets you. It is the disappearing. People stop asking what you are up to because the answer is always the same. And slowly, you become a piece of furniture in your own life. Reliable, load-bearing, invisible. 2 moments from those middle years, and then I'll speed up, because both of these moments come back later with teeth. The first one was 3 years in. I had exactly 200 and change to my name. My shoes were splitting at the sole, and I finally worked up the courage to ask Daniel a question I'd been rehearsing in the bathroom mirror. I asked whether the trust could pay me something. Not a salary, a stipend, gas money, shoe money, a couple hundred a month. Anything. I had looked it up at the library. Paying a family caregiver from a parent's funds is normal. It is legal. Agencies charge families 4 times what I was asking. Daniel listened with his head tilted, the way he probably listened to clients. And then he said no. Gently, regretfully, the way you turn down a child asking for a dog. He said the money had to last, that Mom could live another 20 years, God willing. And then he reached across and squeezed my wrist and said, "Family doesn't invoice family, Ruthie. Family doesn't invoice family." I wrote $7 for a bag of oranges in the green ledger that same night, so that nobody could ever question anything. Now stay with me, because this is where it changes, and you will not hear the change. I didn't. That conversation happened in March, 6 years before the morning with the check. The court records would later show that the very next month, the 1st of April, 6 years before I walked out, a new automatic payment started flowing out of my mother's trust, $2,400 every month. On the 1st, the label on the bank's own records and the bank's own type was caregiver payroll. The caregiver it named was R. Kessler. There are 2 R. Kesslers in this story, but only one of them was carrying our mother up the stairs. I found out where that money actually went 4 years later, page by page, in a conference room, and I will show you every page. That detail is not the twist. That detail is the floor. The twist is standing on. The second moment was 2 years before the end. 7 years in. It was December. The whole family was at the house for Christmas Eve. Daniel and his wife, my sister, and her husband and their daughter June, who was 10 that year and who is, I'll say it now, the one purely good thread running through this whole story. We did presents in the living room. Daniel handed me a flat, heavy package, and everyone watched me open it. And it was a book, a personal finance book, a bestseller about budgeting, the kind with the smiling author on the cover, giving a thumbs up. He'd written on the inside cover, "For Ruthie, it is never too late to get practical. Love, D." His wife laughed. My sister looked at the carpet. Mom, in her chair by the window, didn't fully follow the moment. "And I am glad," I said. "Thank you." I actually said thank you. And I put the book on the shelf in my childhood bedroom next to my high school yearbook. And I went to the kitchen and ran the tap so the sound would cover 60 seconds of me standing very still, with my hands on the counter. I did not cry. Remember that book. Like the stamp. It comes back, that same December. I only matched the dates much later, sitting in my car outside the county recorder's office. A piece of mail came to the house from the county. Official envelope. Government type. Daniel happened to be over that week. He took it off the hall table and said it was property tax stuff, and put it in his coat. I thought nothing of it. You wouldn't have either. It was not property tax stuff. It was the recorded copy of a quitclaim deed, and a quitclaim deed, in plain words, is the fastest and quietest way that exists to move a house from one name to another name. No sale, no realtor, no sign in the yard, 1 page, 1 signature, 1 notary stamp. My mother's house, the paid-off house on Corwin Avenue, the house she sat down on the stairs of and waited 40 minutes, so she wouldn't bother anyone, had been quietly moved out of her trust and into my brother's name, 2 years before she died, while I was upstairs washing her hair in a plastic basin. The stamp on that deed is the same stamp from the kitchen table. Hold on to it. We are one scene away from the morning everything broke, and I need you to see the last 2 years the way I lived them, not knowing any of this, just tired, Just writing oranges and copays in a green book. Just love. Doing what love does. Which is not ask question. Mom's last winter was slow. And then, it was fast. A second. Smaller stroke in the fall. Hospice by Thanksgiving. Hospice nurses coming to the house. Me learning the last set of skills. Nobody thanks you for learning. She died in January. 4 years ago now. At 2 in the morning. In the room she'd shared with my father. Holding my hand. Her last clear sentence to me, 3 days earlier, was, "You'll rest soon, Ruthie." I thought she meant sleep. The funeral was small and fine. Daniel gave the eulogy. He was good at it. He is good at podiums, the way he is good at kitchen tables. He said Mom taught him the value of stewardship. Stewardship. I sat in the second row in a dress from a thrift store on Watervliet Avenue and listened to my brother, who had not spent a single overnight in that house in 9 years. Accept condolences for his devotion. If you have ever watched someone else collect the credit for your years. At a funeral, at a retirement party, in a family group chat, you know the specific temperature of that feeling. It is not hot. It is very, very cold, and it keeps. 10 days after the funeral came the morning I opened this story with. And now I'll give it to you properly. Minute by minute, because I have replayed it enough times to testify to it. And in a way, eventually, I did. It was a Tuesday. Daniel called it a family logistics meeting in a text the night before. He arrived at 10 o'clock exactly, in his gray wool coat, carrying the leather folder he took to client meetings. My sister was on speakerphone from Columbus, her voice small, in the middle of the kitchen table. I made coffee. It is absurd, the details you remember. I remember I set out the good mugs, because some part of me still thought this was a family gathering and not a closing. At 10:15, Daniel opened the folder. He said the estate was simpler than most people expect. He said Mom's accounts had been consolidated for efficiency years ago. He said the house, and here he looked slightly past my ear, at the cabinet with Mom's teacups. The house was already handled. He said a firm would come Thursday to give a market estimate. He said, and I am quoting him exactly, "You'll want to think about your own arrangements, Ruthie. No rush at all. Say end of the month." End of the month. It was the 19th. Then he took out the check. He slid it across the table with 2 fingers. $5,000 drawn on his personal account memo line for everything. He pressed a pen open and set it beside the check, cap aligned with the table edge, because he'd brought a receipt for me to sign. 1 line, typed acknowledgement of full and final settlement of any household contributions. He said, gently, always gently, "This isn't legal, it is just clean. You know how families get about money." And then, because the universe has a sense of structure, even when we don't, he folded his hands on my mother's kitchen table and said it one last time. "Someone has to be the practical one. I want to tell you." I said something devastating. I didn't. I have learned since then that the body sometimes files a verdict before the mind finishes the trial. I stood up. I rinsed my mug. I rinsed the mug. 9 years of training doesn't shut off. And I walked upstairs and packed the same 2 duffel bags I'd arrived with. 29 steps I could do blind. I came down. My sister's voice was saying, "Ruthie, Ruthie, are you still there?" From the speakerphone, Daniel was saying my name in the doorway, with his patient face on. I took the brass key off my key ring, the key he'd handed me on the porch 9 years earlier, like issued equipment, and I set it on the counter next to his check. I did not take the check. I took one thing that wasn't clothes. I took the green ledger, not for evidence. I need to be honest with you, because this whole story runs on honesty. I did not take it because I had a plan. I took it because it was 9 years of my handwriting, and it was the only proof that all those days had happened at all. I walked out the back door at 10:40 in the morning with 2 duffel bags and a grocery ledger and $180, and I drove Mom's old car, my sister's now, technically, one more thing that was never mine, to the Kroger parking lot on Wayne Avenue, and I parked in the far corner by the cart corral, and I cried for about 20 minutes. Alone, engine off, hands at 10 and 2. That is the only time I cry in this entire story. So if you are waiting for me to break down in a courtroom later, let it go now. My mother waited 40 minutes on a stair, so she wouldn't bother anyone. 20 minutes in a Kroger parking lot is the most Kessler grief there is, if any of this is landing somewhere tender. If you were the one who stayed and somebody else held the key, put one word in the comments for me. Just the word invisible. No explanation needed. I read them all, and I promise you there are more of us than you think. Here is your forward hook, and it is a big one, within 6 weeks. A stranger in a strip mall office was going to look at that grocery ledger and tell me what it actually was, and she was going to be right. I stayed on a coworker of a friend's couch for 11 days, then a studio apartment above a hair salon on Wayne Avenue. $390 a month, radiator heat, a bathroom door that didn't fully close. The landlord handed me a single silver key, and I stood in that empty studio holding it, and I thought about the brass. 1 on the string. First key of my adult life that didn't come with a job description. I bought a deadbolt at the hardware store and installed it myself with a video tutorial. Crooked. And I have never loved a home improvement more. The practical problem was immediate. I was 37 with a 9-year hole in my resume. Try explaining a 9-year hole to a hiring manager. I was caring for my mother is the truth, and the truth reads, on paper, like nothing. A woman at the county job center. I'd gone in about resume help, looked at my situation, and slid a flyer across the desk. Free legal aid clinic, Tuesdays and Thursdays. For exactly my kind of mess. No lease history. No recent employer. A dead parent. An estate I understood nothing about. The clinic was in a strip mall on Salem Avenue between a tax preparer and a nail salon, with a broken blind in the front window that hung at a diagonal the whole time. I knew the place. That is where I met Odessa. Odessa Grant was somewhere in her 60s, reading glasses on a beaded chain, and she had spent 22 years as a probate paralegal. Probate being, in plain words, the court that sorts out a dead person's money. Before she retired into volunteering and teaching a night class, she had a way of listening with a pen cap in her teeth and zero facial reaction, which sounds cold and is the opposite. It is the way you listen when you've heard 400 versions of a story and you refuse to insult the 401st with fake gasps. I came in to ask about renters' rights. Somewhere in the intake questions, the whole story came out sideways. The stroke, the key, the check, the end of the month. I talked for 40 minutes. She asked one question the whole time. Who has the bank statements? I said I'd never seen a bank statement in 9 years, but that I'd kept my own records of everything I spent, every receipt in a ledger. She stopped writing. She took the pen cap out of her mouth and said, "You have it with you?" Of course I had it with me. It lived in my bag by then, like a passport. Odessa read my green ledger for 6 full minutes, without a word. 9 years of oranges and copays and furnace filters. Dated, in blue ink. Then she closed it, took off her glasses, and gave me the one line I will carry for the rest of my life. She said, "Out, honey. A woman who writes everything down isn't paranoid. She is a witness who hasn't been called yet." I didn't understand the whole meaning. That afternoon, she did. She'd spent 22 years watching family money cases live or die on one thing: records. And here was a caregiver whose controlling brother had, in his obsession with making me account for every dollar, forced me to build a 9-year, contemporaneous, dated financial record of that household. The system he built to keep me small was a witness statement. His system, my handwriting. Remember when I told you to hold on to the ledger? This is why. But even Odessa didn't know yet what it would eventually be checked against. Neither did I. Stay with me. Now, the rebuild. I am going to give you 4 years and fast forward, because you already know I survive. The question this whole video is answering is not whether I made it. It is how a woman with a grocery ledger takes down a man with a glass office. So here is the montage, and I'll only slow down where it matters. Odessa got me a temp job filing at a small law office within a month. Actual filing, paper cuts, $9 and change an hour. I was, it turns out, terrifyingly good at filing. 9 years of every dollar in, every dollar out. Will do that to a brain. 6 months in, one of the attorneys watched me reconcile a client's shoebox of receipts into a clean spreadsheet in an afternoon and asked if I'd ever thought about becoming a paralegal. Odessa taught the night class. Of course, Odessa taught the night class. I enrolled that same week at the community college, Tuesdays and Thursdays, 6 to 9 in the evening, 18 months. Paid for with a payment plan and a scholarship for what the form beautifully called displaced homemakers. I was 38, the second oldest in the room, and I studied the way you study when the material is secretly your own autopsy. Wills, trusts, my powers of attorney, the duties of a trustee. There is a word that came up in the second month that rearranged my skeleton. Fiduciary. A fiduciary is anyone legally trusted to handle money that isn't theirs. And the law's one commandment for a fiduciary is that they must be able to show every dollar, not explain. Show. I sat in a plastic chair in a night class and learned that for 8 years I had been living under a standard of proof my brother had invented for me, while he, the actual fiduciary, the actual key holder, was legally required to keep the very records he had never once shown anyone. I finished the certificate 2 years after I walked out of that kitchen. The little law office hired me full-time, and here, the story takes the turn that makes everything after it possible. So mark this. The firm's main practice was probate, estates, trusts, trusts, and a steady stream of cases the attorneys called, with tired faces, family surprise cases. An adult child discovers, after a death, where the money actually went. I spent my working days assembling something called a fiduciary accounting, a court-ordered list, backed by bank records, of every dollar into and out of someone's trust. I got good at it. Then, I got known for it. Judges, clerks started recognizing my exhibit binders. I still wrote everything down, old habit, green ink now, a new ledger for my own little life, rent and groceries and night class payments. Because the habit he installed to shrink me had somehow become the spine of my profession. And on my key ring, 1 silver key and 1 crooked deadbolt key, both mine. I'd look at them at red lights. Small things. Load. Bearing. One more piece of the rebuild because it matters to what comes later, in my second year at the firm. Odessa talked me into volunteering 2 Saturdays a month for the county's guardianship review program. Ordinary citizens, trained and sworn, who check the files of people appointed to manage the money of adults who can't manage their own. I sat in a fluorescent-lit county room with a stack of folders and looked over and over at the same quiet shape, a relative with the key, a relative with the labor, and a gap between the paperwork and the truth that nobody had ever been asked to explain. Some files were clean and kind. Some were my family, with different names. I learned to tell the difference in about 4 pages. And I learned something else. Something I want every invisible caregiver hearing this to write on the fridge. The system is not designed to notice you. It is designed to answer you. It will sit there, silent, forever, until one interested person asks one formal question. Keep that phrase in your pocket. We are almost at the door. Somewhere in year 3, I stopped being angry in the mornings, which is its own quiet milestone. And then, 3.5 years after the kitchen, a routine Tuesday at work handed me the door. I was preparing a standard accounting case, nothing to do with my family, and the attorney I worked for, walking past my desk, said the sentence lawyers say without knowing they're detonating something. Any beneficiary can demand this, you know. It is not a privilege. It is the statute. I stopped typing, because here is what I knew by then. Cold. The way you know your own address. My mother's trust had named her 3 children as beneficiaries. Daniel had said so himself. Once, in passing. At that 11-minute cafeteria meeting 9 years earlier. Back when he thought the word would soothe us. A beneficiary is what the court calls an interested person. And an interested person has the legal right to walk into probate court and ask a judge to order the trustee to produce a full accounting. Every dollar in, every dollar out, backed by the bank's own records. No accusation required, no lawsuit required, just a petition and a filing fee. For 9 years, he had demanded that I account for every orange. The law, it turned out, had been standing behind me the entire time, waiting for me to ask him the same question with a judge in the room. I want to be completely clean with you about how I did this, because this genre is full of stories where the narrator bends a rule and calls it justice. And I didn't. And the fact that I didn't is why it worked. I did not touch my own family's matter at my firm. Not a search, not a database login. Nothing. I told my boss the whole situation the same week, out loud, in her office, and she nodded and said, "Good, keep it that way, and go get him." I went back to the strip mall with a crooked blind. Odessa connected me with a legal aid attorney who took beneficiary cases. A rumpled, unhurried man. I'll just call the attorney, because you've now met everyone in this story who needs a name. We filed the petition in probate court on a Thursday morning. Filing fee, $245. I paid it with my own debit card from my own account, attached to my own name, and I will not pretend that swiping that card didn't feel like a hinge in the history of the world. Daniel called me that night. First call in 3.5 years. Voice warm as ever. "Ruthie, there is no need for all this formality. Let's just talk." I said one sentence. "Give the records to the court, Daniel." And I hung up and I made tea, and my hands were almost steady. He had 60 days. His lawyer asked for 30 more. The court gave him 15. And then, on a gray afternoon in early spring, 4 years almost to the week after I left that kitchen, a box of records arrived at the attorney's office. And the attorney called me and said 4 words I'd been building toward for a decade without knowing it. "Come read these with me. Here is the evidence. One piece at a time. Exactly the way it came out of that box." If you've ever imagined the moment where the paper finally says out loud what you always felt in your chest, this is that moment. And I am going to walk you through it slowly because I earn slow. First, the bank statements. Years of them. Hundreds of pages. My mother's trust account laid open for the first time. We started at the oldest page and moved forward, and it was ordinary. Property tax, furnace repair, the pharmacy. Ordinary. Ordinary. And then, 6 years before the end, dated the 1st of April, one new line, an automatic monthly transfer, $2,400. The bank's own label, caregiver, payroll, Kessler. My stomach dropped through the floor of the building, because for one whole minute, I thought I had somehow been receiving money I'd never seen. And then the attorney flipped one page further in the same stack, to the transfer detail, and there was the destination account. Not mine. An account at a different bank. Opened. By Daniel. The R was for his wife, Renee. My brother had put his wife on his own mother's books as the paid family caregiver, at the exact going agency rate, starting the month after he told me, family doesn't invoice family. She never spent one night in that house. I checked the dates against my green ledger. The ledger sat on that conference table next to the bank statements. Blue ink against laser print. And every date she was supposedly on duty. My handwriting was buying the groceries. Let me do the arithmetic for you, because nobody should have to do math while their heart is pounding. $2,400 a month. 72 months. That is $172,800, paid out of a disabled widow's savings for care that a different woman was providing for free. One flight of stairs up. $172,000 is a paid-off house on our street. It is every year of my 30s with a price tag on it. A price he set himself, at market rate, which means my brother knew exactly what my work was worth. He billed for it. He just billed it to a different Kessler. Second, same box, deeper down. The brokerage records, because the court's order covered where the money went, not just where it left. The payroll account drained monthly into an investment account, in Daniel and Renee's names. He hadn't even hidden it well. Why would he? No one had ever asked. That is the part I need you to understand about how this actually happens in real families. It isn't genius. It is confidence. It is 6 years of nobody asking. And third, the deed. This one I'd already found on my own, months earlier, in 20 minutes, in public records. Because deeds are public, and a copy costs about the price of lunch, at the county recorder's office. The quitclaim deed moving Mom's house out of her trust and into Daniel's name. Dated that December of the budgeting book, my mother's shaky signature at the bottom, and beside it, pressed in blue, the notary stamp. The stamp from the kitchen table. I told you, it mattered. Here is why. A notary's authority isn't permanent. It is a commission, and a commission expires. And the state keeps a public website where anyone on earth can type in a notary's name and see the dates. I typed it in at my kitchen table one night at 11:40 at night, and I sat very still, the way I'd once stood at Mom's counter with the tap running. Her commission had expired 14 months before the date on that deed, which means the one stamp whose entire legal purpose is to prove that a signing really, properly happened. Proved nothing. The house had left my mother's trust on the strength of a dead stamp. And the sale? He'd sold the house 6 weeks after I walked out, $214,000, to a couple who repainted my mother's kitchen gray. The sale was built on top of it. 3 pieces of paper. The payroll pages. The brokerage trail. The dead stamp. Deed. And underneath all 3, the 4th thing. The thing that wasn't in his box because it had been in my bag for 4 years. 9 years of blue ink saying who was actually in that house, on which days, buying which oranges, his records versus my records, except they were all, in the end, my records. He'd made sure of that himself, 9 years earlier, on Brown Street, for everyone's protection, so that nobody could ever question anything. The hearing was on a Tuesday morning. Of course, it was a Tuesday. This entire story runs on Tuesdays. In a 3rd-floor courtroom with radiator heat, like my studio. I need to tell you what a reckoning actually looks like when you do it inside the rules, because it does not look like the movies, and it is better than the movies. Nobody shouts. Nobody storms. A magistrate, a judicial officer who handles exactly this kind of case, sat under a state seal, and asked questions in the tone of a man checking a manifest. My sister drove down from Columbus and sat on my side of the aisle, on the bench right behind me, and when Daniel walked in with his lawyer, she did not look at him, and that small turned shoulder was 9 years of something. Finally choosing a side, I testified for about 40 minutes, numbered facts. I had rehearsed exactly one thing, that I would inform, not argue. 1. The date of the stroke, and who moved in. 2. The date I asked to be paid, and the answer I received, word for word. 3. The date, 1 month later, that the payroll to Renee began. 4. The ledger, entered as an exhibit. Every page copied. My 9 years of blue ink, now a court record with a sticker on it. 5. The deed and the stamp and the public expiration date, printed straight off the state's own website. Daniel's lawyer objected to almost none of it, because there is almost nothing to object to when a witness only says things that documents also say. At one point, the magistrate held up a photocopied ledger page, a Tuesday from 6 years back, milk, prescription, copay, furnace filter, and asked me, "And you made these entries at the time in the ordinary course?" And I said, "Every day, Your Honor." My brother's rule, and the magistrate looked at Daniel for exactly 1 second longer than he needed to. And that 1 second was worth more to me than the check. Daniel testified too. I'll be fair to him, because fairness is the whole point of me. He did not lie outright. He did something I'd watched him do my entire life. He reframed. The payroll was compensating the family for oversight. The deed was standard planning. The dead stamp was a technicality he'd relied on professionals for. He used the word stewardship 4 times. He used the word Ruth 0 times. And gently, patiently, the magistrate took his answers apart with a 9-year-old grocery ledger, the way you take apart a watch. No force, just the right small tool. The decision came in writing. 11 days later, my attorney called and read it to me while I stood in my studio, holding the phone with both hands. Removal. Daniel was removed as trustee, effective immediately. The court's polite phrase for you, no longer hold the key. Surcharge. And a surcharge is simply the court's word for pay it back. The full caregiver payroll, $172,800, plus the house money, $214,000, less the modest expenses he could actually document, $355,800, restored to my mother's estate, to be divided the way her trust had always said. 3 children, 3 shares. The written finding used the phrase, breach of fiduciary duty, which is the driest possible language for what my chest did when I heard it. And the deed matter, the dead stamp, was referred by the court itself to the county prosecutor and the state's notary commission, which is exactly where it belonged, and exactly not my job. I never sent a single angry letter. I never posted a single word online. I asked one question in the one building designed to answer it, and the system he'd hidden inside for 9 years turned around and read him its own rules. Now the consequences, in flat factual order, because you've waited long enough, and cold facts are the dessert course of this genre. 1. He paid. Not gracefully, in installments, with liens, with the sale of the very brokerage account the payroll had been feeding. But he paid every documented dollar. 2. His career. A financial advisor lives and dies on a public record of trustworthiness, and a court finding that you breached a fiduciary duty to your own disabled mother is the kind of line item that does not stay quiet in a glass building. He was gone from the firm within the quarter, resigned to pursue other opportunities, said the announcement, in the same font they use for retirements. The man whose entire identity was being the practical one now explains, to every future employer and every regulator's form, in writing, what happened to the last money he was trusted with. 3. Renee filed for divorce the following spring. I take no joy in that one, and I am not going to pretend it is my victory. I mention it because you deserve the complete ledger, and because her lawyer, I am told, found the caregiver payroll account very interesting for entirely separate reasons. And then, right on schedule, came the part Odessa had warned me about in the strip mall, with the pen cap in her teeth. When the money moves back, honey, that is when they finally call. 11 voicemails in 9 days. I kept them. I never returned one. He came to my office lobby once, at 4:40 in the afternoon, in the gray wool coat, and the receptionist, bless her forever, told him I was unavailable while I sat 40 feet away reconciling a stranger's trust. And finally, the email. 900 words. I counted the important ones the way I count everything now. The word family, 14 times. The word difficult, 6. The word sorry, 0. In 900 words, he asked to move forward for June's sake. He suggested I had always been emotional about money, which, from the man whose emotions about money were at that moment secured by a court lien, is the closest thing to a joke he has ever written. I replied once, with the only sentence I had been saving for 4 years. 5 words. Someone had to be practical. Then I archived the thread, and I made tea, and my hands were completely steady. So, where does a story like this land? I'll tell you where it doesn't land. There is no reunion. Nobody wants that ending to be the honest one. And I am not going to sell it to you. My brother and I have not spoken since that email, and I don't expect we will. And most mornings that fact is not a wound. It is a boundary with grass growing over it. What I got instead is smaller, and it is mine. I got my share of my mother's estate, which became the first home I've ever owned. A little brick 2-bedroom with a kitchen. I will never paint gray, and a front door I put the lock on myself. Straight, this time I've had practice. I got my sister back, slowly, over long phone calls, both of us learning that silence had been his best tool, and refusing to lend it to him anymore. And I got June, 16 now, who takes the bus over some Sundays and sits at my kitchen table doing homework, and who asked me once, carefully, why I keep an old green notebook on the shelf next to a budgeting book with a thumbs-up man on the cover. I keep the book. By the way, spite is not always loud. Sometimes spite is a bookend, and the notebook. Here is the ending I owe you, because I promised in the first minute that you'd learn what the green ledger was worth. The night before the hearing, I read the whole thing cover to cover. One last time, the way you check a parachute, and in the back, past my last entry, past the blank ruled pages, I found handwriting that wasn't mine, shaky, right-handed, pencil, my mother's. How? She must have found the ledger some afternoon while I was out on a pharmacy run, in those last couple of years, and understood exactly what it was, and exactly why her daughter had been made to keep it. She didn't confront anyone. That was never her way. She was the woman who waited on the stairs. Instead, in the back of the book where every dollar of my life had been audited, she had started her own column. No dates, no amounts, just lines, a few words each. In pencil, R. Carried me up. Again. R. Sat with me through the storm. Cut my hair. Made me laugh. Stayed. 2 pages of it, the last entry, in letters that took visible effort, said, "Nobody counts what Ruthie gives, so I will." I did not cry. I told you at the Kroger parking lot, once, alone, and never again in this story. And I kept my word even then. I read it twice, and I slept better than I had in 4 years. And the next morning, I walked into a courtroom carrying the only exhibit in the building that had 2 sets of handwriting in it. For 9 years, I thought that ledger was my leash. Proof. I owed somebody an explanation for every orange. Then for one spring I thought it was my weapon. The witness Odessa said hadn't been called yet. It was both of those things. And it was neither. It was a record of my worth that someone had been keeping in secret the whole time. In pencil, in her failing hand. In the back pages, where the auditors never look. My brother spent 9 years making me account for every dollar in and every dollar out. He just never checked the back of the book. The practical ones never do. If you stayed with me all the way here, if you've ever been the invisible one, the load-bearing one, the one who wrote it all down just to prove you existed, do 2 things. Share this with the person in your family who stayed, because I guarantee your family has one, and she thinks nobody counted. And then go start writing things down. Dates, amounts, plain blue ink. Not because you are paranoid, because you are a witness who hasn't been called yet.